history of time is written not in sand, but in the iron lines of law. From the clay of ancient Alexandria to the shifting borders of today, justice is the language of our shared survival. These are the Lawcratic Briefings. Lawcratic Briefings.
Consider a sovereign state that's attempting to navigate this really punitive global trade architecture.
Right.
And the state government, they make these aggressive, painful domestic policy choices, to drastically cut their reliance on sanctioned Russian energy. And they do it. The state achieves its goal.
Imports plummet.
Exactly. Imports plummet. Yet precisely at the moment of this successful compliance, the state is certainly hit with a devastating unilateral tariff on its exports to the United States.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. Why does that happen? Because while this state reduced its energy imports, 4 neighboring countries reduced theirs slightly faster.
Oh.
So in the math of relative volume, the state mathematically ascends into a top 5 ranking.
Triggering this automatic penalty that has, absolutely nothing to do with its actual behavioral compliance.
Exactly. We're examining a legislative landscape today where the math of a statute is poised to dictate geopolitical reality, and where the text itself might actually be functionally at war with its own definitions.
It's a really profound structural puzzle. I mean, when you try to codify global commodity flows into this rigid statutory formula, the friction between the text on the page and the physical reality of international trade it becomes immediately apparent.
Yeah, it really does. So today we are doing a detailed operational deep dive into a research paper from Lawcratic, and it's titled "The Frozen Baseline."
Which is a great title, by the way.
It is, yeah. The paper does this amazing forensic examination of Section 113 of the Lindsey Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act. But before we look at a single line of this text, we have to do a mandatory status check.
Yes, absolutely critical.
This is so important for you, the listener, to understand exactly what we're looking at. The text under review is a Senate-passed amendment to a pending House bill. It passed the Senate on August 7, 2026.
So it is pending legislation.
Right. It is unequivocally not an enacted law.
And that distinction, it has to govern our entire analysis today. We are not dissecting active enforceable law here. We're looking at the architecture of a proposed mechanism.
Our objective is to analyze how this text is designed to function if it were to secure final passage and a presidential signature.
Right, focusing specifically on those operational mechanics.
Exactly. So the mission of this deep dive is to methodically trace those mechanics. We're going to analyze the structure of Section 113 from its procedural origin as a legislative vehicle all the way down to what the Lawcratic paper identifies as its core functional mismatch.
We'll outline exactly how this proposed statute intends to mathematically calculate and then penalize third country alignment with the Russian energy economy.
Which really frames the intellectual stakes of our analysis today. I mean, when a legislative body drafts a mechanism to quantify and penalize global trade, what happens when the statute's mathematical mandate outpaces its own definitions?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the procedural foundation of the text.
Right.
Because to understand how this mechanism was engineered, you have to understand the highly specific legislative vehicle that's carrying it.
Yeah, and the vehicle carrying this massive foreign policy architecture is H.R. 5334. And if you go back and look at the origin of that bill in the House of Representatives, it has absolutely nothing to do with international sanctions.
Nothing at all.
Or Russia, or Iran, or global energy markets. It was introduced by Representative Panetta as a domestic tax bill.
Right, yeah. The original focus of H.R. 5334 was amending the Internal Revenue Code of 1986.
Wow.
Specifically, it was drafted to allow early childhood educators to claim the educator expense deduction, which was, a deduction previously restricted just to standard K-12 school teachers.
Right.
And that was the entirety of the legislative intent when the bill left the House.
So we have a targeted amendment to the domestic tax code for pre-K teachers. For you, the listener, tracing the legislative process, the obvious question is, how does a domestic tax deduction turn into a sprawling, punitive global energy sanctions regime?
Well, the Senate didn't just append the sanctions to the tax deduction. They basically executed a structural overhaul.
Yeah. On August 7, 2026, the Senate took up H.R. 5334. and they used a specific procedural mechanism. They basically struck Section 1 of the House bill entirely.
Just deleted it.
Right, deleted it.
Yeah.
And in that void, they inserted Division A, which is the Lindsey-Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act of 2026.
But the original educator expense deduction wasn't just discarded, right?
No, it was redesignated. It actually survives in the amended text as Division B.
Okay, so we really need to explain the procedural necessity of this maneuver. Because the Senate attaching foreign policy to a tax bill, it isn't an arbitrary choice.
Not at all.
It's driven by a strict constitutional imperative regarding how the U.S. government is allowed to raise revenue.
Right. The constitutional framework is the origination clause. That's in Article 1, Section 7 of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And it mandates that all bills for raising revenue have to originate in the House of Representatives.
Exactly. And the sanctions architecture in the Graham Act, specifically Sections 112 and 113, they operate fundamentally by raising tariffs.
They mandate duties of up to 100% ad valorem on specific imported goods.
And let's just clarify, ad valorem for the listener, just in case.
Good idea.
That means a tax assessed based on the monetary value of the goods being imported, right, rather than their weight or quantity.
So a 100% ad valorem duty effectively doubles the cost of the imported item.
Precisely. And under the procedural rules of Congress, tariffs and import duties are classified strictly as revenue measures.
Which means the Senate doesn't have the constitutional authority to originate a standalone bill imposing these tariffs.
Right. They're procedurally bound to find a bill that has already legitimately originated in the House, strip out or amend its contents, and use that pre-existing House bill as the vehicle for their revenue-raising sanctions.
So this classification of the sanctions as a revenue measure is really structurally embedded throughout the text, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's heavily embedded in the jurisdictional routing. Like, if you look at Section 117, which governs the termination of a duty, the statute routes the mandatory congressional review directly to the House Committee on Ways and Means and the Senate Committee on Finance. It bypasses the Foreign Affairs Committees entirely for that specific function.
Acknowledging that modifying a tariff is basically a matter of taxation and revenue jurisdiction.
Exactly.
Which results in this wildly bifurcated legislative vehicle. You have this complex global sanctions regime occupying Division A, riding on a House revenue bill drafted for early childhood educators in Division B.
It's quite the legislative Frankenstein.
It really is. Now, the procedural history on the Senate floor on August 7 tells a vital story here. This is not just, a passive passage. The chamber actively evaluated the specific mathematical tariff mechanism we're about to discuss.
Yeah, the floor record shows deliberate endorsement.
During the consideration of the amended vehicle, Senator Rand Paul actually submitted an amendment designed to strike the third country duty provision outright. The intent was to surgically remove Section 113 from the broader sanctions package.
Right. And the Senate rejected that removal by a recorded vote of 32 to 64.
And I really want to underscore the significance of that roll call for the listener. A vote of 32 to 64 means the chamber explicitly debated a proposal to strip this exact tariff authority from the executive branch, and they overwhelmingly voted to keep it.
Yes, it legally establishes that the text of Section 113 has to be read as a deliberate, intentional statutory formula. The Senate knew exactly what mechanism they were preserving.
And furthermore, the Senate bypassed an opportunity to place strict temporal guardrails on that mechanism, right?
They did. Senator Cantwell filed an amendment that would have required explicit notification to Congress within 48 hours of any duty being imposed.
Wow, 48 hours.
Yeah, and crucially, it contained an automatic expiry clause. It would have terminated any imposed duty after 60 days unless Congress enacted a joint resolution of approval.
Right. And an affirmative approval requirement like that would completely change the balance of power in the statute.
Yeah.
It would force the executive to continually justify the tariffs to the legislature.
But that amendment was never adopted.
It was ordered to lie on the table, never even called up for a vote.
Right. So having disposed of the Paul Amendment and bypassed the Cantwell Amendment, the Senate just proceeded to final passage of the amended vehicle, which succeeded 86 to 11.
So the Senate deliberately preserved this mathematical weapon, unconstrained by automatic sunsets or, affirmative legislative approvals.
Exactly.
But a statutory weapon needs a targeting system.
Yeah.
How exactly does this text tell the executive branch to figure out which sovereign states get hit with a 100% tariff?
That requires looking at what the Lawcratic paper defines as the baseline arithmetic.
Okay, let's get into the baseline arithmetic.
The targeting parameters are codified in what we can call the initial baseline rule, and that's in subsection C. The statute directs the president to increase the rate of duty on goods imported into the U.S. from any country described in this subsection.
And it establishes 3 distinct operational routes into that tariff category, right?
Yes. So the first route governs crude oil.
And how does the text define a target in that category?
A country qualifies under the crude oil route if it knowingly made new purchases of Russian origin crude oil on or after the 30th day following enactment.
Okay.
But the critical mathematical component is the volume threshold. The country must have been among the 5 largest importers of such crude oil by total volume during the most recent 12-month period preceding enactment.
So the statute targets the top 5 largest global importers of Russian crude oil by volume.
Yes. And the second route is structurally identical, but it governs natural gas.
Got it. So a country qualifies if it was among the 5 largest importers of Russian natural gas by total volume during that same predefined historical period.
Right. And then the third route diverges from commodities entirely. It captures the top 5 sovereign states facilitating Russian oil sanctions evasion during that period.
Okay, so we have 3 distinct categories established on day 1.
Right.
Top 5 oil, top 5 gas, and top 5 evasion facilitators.
But the paper emphasizes that this isn't a static targeting system. The statute tries to track ongoing trade flows through what we can call a rolling recalculation engine.
And that engine is located in subsection E.
Yes. This clause mandates that not later than 180 days after the initial imposition of duties, and then every 180 days after that, the U.S. Trade Representative must recalculate the rankings.
So every 6 months.
Exactly. And the text requires this recalculation to be based on the most recent 12-month period preceding the determination.
Okay, I want to highlight a really crucial misreading here that often circulates in high-level summaries of this proposed architecture.
The 5 biggest buyers myth.
Yes. The shorthand assumption is always that the statute creates a single, unified list of the 5 biggest energy buyers. But a strict reading of the rolling recalculation engine reveals a very different mathematical reality.
It does. The text explicitly fragments the recalculation mandate. Paragraph E1 splits the task into 2 entirely distinct determinations.
Right. The trade representative is statutorily required to determine the 5 largest importers of crude oil and, totally separately, the 5 largest importers of natural gas.
Which means the statute mandates the production of a crude oil list of 5 countries and an independent natural gas list of 5 countries.
Now, in the real world of global energy markets, those lists will probably overlap, right? And major industrial economy might be a top buyer of both.
Sure.
But structurally, the statute authorizes the penalization of up to 10 distinct sovereign states, not 5.
Yeah, the arithmetic capacity of the statute is double what a casual reading implies. Up to 10 states are exposed to the tariff category through these parallel tracks.
So, if a state finds itself caught in this mathematical net, say commercial tracking, puts them at number 4 for natural gas volume, does the statute provide any mechanism for relief before that 100% duty hits?
It does, but it's incredibly restrictive. The text provides a singular, highly restricted exemption in subsection D.
Just one.
Just one. And first of all, the exemption applies exclusively to natural gas.
Wait, really? So for crude oil, there's just no defense at all?
0 equivalent relief for countries captured under the crude oil route. If a state is in the top 5 for crude oil, they are subject to the tariff, period.
Wow. Okay, but for the natural gas list, what is the threshold for this exemption?
A state has to satisfy 2 conditions simultaneously. The first is mathematical. The importing country's total Russian origin gas imports during the relevant window must amount to less than 15% of Russia's total annual gas exports.
Okay, let us isolate that denominator because it is mathematically extraordinary. The statute doesn't measure the volume of imports against the importing country's own domestic energy consumption.
It does not.
Which is wild. If a European state relies on Russian natural gas for, 85% of its sovereign domestic grid, the statute considers that domestic reliance mathematically irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant, yes.
The only metric that matters is what percentage of Russia's total global exports that specific state consumes.
Which means the mathematical threshold is set extraordinarily high. I mean, when you measure a single nation's import volume against the total volume of gas the Russian Federation exports globally, almost every individual sovereign state will effortlessly clear that bar.
Because it's exceedingly rare for a single country to consume more than 15% of Russia's total worldwide gas exports.
Exactly.
So because the quantitative bar is designed to be easily cleared by almost any candidate state, it basically renders the mathematical test performative.
Right. It shifts the true burden of the exemption entirely onto the second condition, which is a qualitative test.
And what's the qualitative limb?
It requires that the importing state must have taken significant steps to reduce its imports of Russian natural gas.
Okay, but I'm looking through the text of the proposed bill, and I cannot find a definition section that quantifies significant steps. Like, does it mandate a specific percentage reduction?
No.
Does it require the cancellation of long-term contracts?
It requires none of those things because it defines none of them. The phrase significant steps to reduce is left completely undefined in the legislative text.
That is wild. That places an astonishing degree of interpretive power in the hands of the executive branch.
It really does.
If the mathematical exemption is functionally guaranteed for most states, the sole barrier between a sovereign nation and a 100% ad valorem U.S. tariff is whether an executive branch official subjectively thinks their policy choices are significant steps.
Yeah, the statute constructs an exemption that looks arithmetic on its face, but it operates entirely as a discretionary qualitative judgment.
Right.
And this reliance on undefined terms to govern rigid statutory math forces us to look at the foundational premise of the whole targeting system.
Which is how they even measure the volume in the first place. If the selection process relies absolutely on ranking countries by total volume, how does the statute define and measure that volume?
Right, because measuring volume sounds deceptively simple.
Right, like if we were ranking the largest importers of commercial aircraft, we would just count the fuselages. 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. But the statute requires the measurement of complex hydrocarbons. So to understand this, we have to unpack how the text defines the commodity scope, specifically looking at the customs categories adopted in subsection G2.
Okay, let's break down subsection G-.
The text utilizes the harmonized system, commonly referred to as the HS code.
Right, that's the internationally standardized numerical method of classifying traded products administered by the World Customs Organization.
Yes, and Section 113 designates two specific HS headings. For crude oil, it mandates the use of HS 2709. For natural gas, it mandates HS 2711.
Now, the Lawcratic paper points out that the measurement of HS 2709 for crude oil is structurally sound, right?
Yeah. Heading 2709 is titled Petroleum Oils and Oils Obtained from Bituminous Minerals, Crude. It covers raw crude oil and very little else.
So when the statute demands a calculation of total volume across 2709, the executive branch is essentially just adding up barrels of a physically comparable liquid substance.
Exactly. The underlying arithmetic holds together.
But the architecture completely fractures when we examine HS 2711 for natural gas.
It really does.
Because the statute doesn't use the term natural gas in its colloquial sense, does it? It binds the targeting system to the entirety of that specific customs heading.
And that heading is remarkably broad. HS 2711 is officially titled Petroleum Gases and Other Gaseous Hydrocarbons.
Okay.
It certainly includes natural gas in its gaseous state pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas, or LNG. But the heading doesn't stop there.
What else is in it?
It also encompasses propane, butanes, ethane, and complex chemical olefins like ethylene, propylene, butylene, and butadiene.
So the statute lumps a vast array of distinct industrial chemicals, liquids, and gases under a single statutory umbrella. And then it demands that the executive branch rank countries by the total volume of that entire aggregated category.
Which generates an immediate unit incompatibility crisis.
I can see why.
Within the U.S. Customs Schedule, these distinct substances within heading 2711 are measured using entirely different physical metrics.
How so?
Natural gas in its gaseous state is reported in thousands of cubic meters. That's a measurement of spatial volume. Propane and butanes are reported in barrels, which is a measurement of liquid capacity.
Okay.
And the olefins, like ethylene, are reported in kilograms, a measurement of physical weight.
This is the crux of the measurement crisis right here. The proposed statute orders the trade representative to calculate total volume, but it is mathematically incoherent to add thousands of cubic meters of spatial volume, barrels of liquid, and kilograms of weight together to produce a single integer for ranking.
You literally can't do it.
You cannot add distance, liquid, and mass without a unified conversion standard.
Right. A conversion standard is an absolute necessity to make the units arithmetically comparable.
Now, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection architecture does possess a statistical rule designed to address aspects of this, doesn't it?
It does. There's a statistical note in Chapter 27 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule that directs liquid natural gas to be reported on a gaseous equivalent volume basis.
So a methodology for unit conversion exists within U.S. law, but the Lawcratic paper points out a fatal jurisdictional flaw in relying on that existing architecture.
The jurisdictional flaw is absolute. That statistical note governs goods entering the customs territory of the United States.
Oh, I see.
It is designed exclusively for American customs officials processing American entry summaries for cargoes arriving at American ports.
But Section 113 isn't measuring U.S. imports. It is measuring third-country imports from the Russian Federation.
Exactly. The statute is attempting to rank cargoes moving from a Russian export terminal in the Baltic Sea directly to a port in East Asia or Western Europe.
Those cargoes never enter U.S. territorial waters. They never touch an American port facility.
They never generate a U.S. customs entry summary.
Right. Therefore, the existing U.S. customs conversion architecture has zero jurisdiction over the data the statute demands.
And the text of Section 113 fails entirely to incorporate or prescribe any conversion standard for the foreign country rankings it mandates. It basically just creates a mathematical void.
Which raises a fundamental question of execution. If the statute demands a ranking, but fails to provide the mathematical standard to calculate it, how will the executive branch actually generate this list? How is that void filled in practice?
Well, in the absence of a statutory methodology, the executive branch has to rely on commercial tracking and open-source data analytics.
Because sovereign public statistical systems often obscure this data, right?
Yeah, certain large importing nations have explicitly curtailed the public disclosure of sensitive energy import volumes. So independent commercial trackers has really become the arbiters of global flow.
I want to spend significant time unpacking exactly how these commercial trackers operate, because they're not simply transcribing official government ledgers.
Far from it.
The listener needs to understand the sheer volume of assumption and estimation required to generate the numbers this proposed statute relies upon. Let's look at pipeline flows, for example.
Okay.
How do you track a molecule of gas traveling through an interconnected cross-border pipeline network?
Well, the short answer is you can't track the individual molecule, which means you must build an attribution model.
Right.
Imagine a massive pipeline network traversing 3 sovereign states in Eastern Europe. The Russian Federation injects a specific volume of gas at the eastern border of country A.
Tracking so far.
Country A consumes a portion of that gas, but also injects its own domestically produced gas into the same pipeline network. The blended gas then flows into country B.
Right.
Country B extracts some, injects gas it purchased from Norway, let's say, and sends the resulting mixture across the border into country C.
Okay, so if you are the U.S. executive branch trying to enforce Section 113, how do you determine what exact volume of the gas arriving in country C is of Russian origin?
Commercial trackers solve this through mathematical modeling. They utilize what is known as a perfect gas mixer assumption.
A perfect gas mixer. What does that assume?
This model hypothesizes that at every node, junction, and storage facility within that pipeline network, the different sources of gas blend perfectly and uniformly on any given day.
So if country B's pipeline network contains 50% Russian gas and 50% Norwegian gas,
the model assumes that every single cubic meter extracted by country C consists of exactly 50% Russian molecules and 50% Norwegian molecules.
wow, precisely 50-50.
Precisely. But the physical reality of fluid dynamics in a high-pressure pipeline network is vastly more complex than that.
Right, because gas doesn't mix perfectly, does it?
No, it moves in pressure waves, it pools in specific regional infrastructure, and its flow is dictated by localized demand spikes and temperature differentials.
So the perfect gas mixer is not a physical reality, it's a mathematical fiction.
It is an operational choice made by data analysts to generate a quantifiable number where physical certainty is impossible.
And the assumptions do not end there. The Lawcratic paper notes that trackers use fixed density constants to convert pipeline pressure into volume.
Right.
They use seasonal projection algorithms to fill in gaps when a sovereign state delays its customs reporting.
Yeah, they even derive pipeline figures by taking total reported historical consumption and subtracting observable seaborne LNG shipments.
That's just wild to me. Every single one of those methodological steps represents an operational choice.
A choice that fundamentally alters the outcome. A different tracking firm using a slightly different density constant or a modified attribution model for a specific pipeline junction will generate a completely different volume calculation.
Right. Quantification at this scale is not objectivity. Every dataset operationalizes a unique definition of reality.
And yet, Section 113 relies on this foundational instability to impose a 100% tariff.
But But the drafters of the proposed legislation seem to have anticipated this measurement gap, right? Because the statute requires the executive branch to formally explain its math.
Yes, subsection G1b creates an executive burden. Before the president can impose any duties, the executive branch must submit a written justification to the appropriate congressional committees.
And what does that justification have to include?
It must detail the specific methodology used to determine that the country subject to the duty actually qualifies under the baseline eligibility rules.
Which highlights a profound institutional consequence. Think about it. If the statute had simply defined its own terms, if Congress had codified a specific density constant, mandated a specific conversion rate for olefins, and dictated the use of a specific public data set.
There would be no methodology for the executive to disclose.
Exactly. The executive would simply execute the math provided by the legislature.
But because the statute failed to provide the mathematical architecture, it effectively delegates the operational construction of its own scope entirely to the executive branch.
The executive is legally forced to write the very math tests that the statute demands they administer and enforce.
It's a huge delegation of authority.
It really is. So if entering this statutory targeting system is fraught with mathematical ambiguity and relies heavily on executive methodology, the next logical question is how a state exits the system.
Ah, yes, exiting the system.
Once a country is captured by the rolling recalculation engine, how do they get out? This brings us to the most concerning architectural feature of the text.
Right.
Entry without delisting.
Yeah, a rigorous reading of the text reveals a glaring structural omission. The mechanism operates as a one-way street.
A one-way street.
As we established, entry into the tariff regime is driven by an arithmetic recalculation that recurs on a fixed 180-day cycle.
Right.
But there is absolutely no provision within Section 113 that dictates a duty must end when a country mathematically falls out of the top 5.
Let's trace that practically, just to make sure we're seeing how wild this is. If I am the government of country A, and I am ranked number 5 during the initial baseline calculation, I am hit with the 100% tariff. 6 months later, the rolling recalculation engine runs again. My domestic policies have worked, my imports have dropped, and I am now ranked number 7. Under the text of this proposed bill, am I still subject to the 100% tariff?
Based on the strict text of the statute, yes.
Unbelievable.
There is no automatic arithmetic delisting clause. The statute instructs the trade representative to determine the new top 5 and impose duties accordingly. However, it contains no parallel instruction to withdraw, suspend, or cancel a duty that was imposed under a previous 180-day determination.
But surely the executive branch has the authority to adjust the tariff rate. Subsection B explicitly allows the trade representative to modify rates if a country alters its behavior.
Right.
Why cannot that modification authority be used as a de facto exit mechanism? Just lower it to 0.
Because subsection B contains a legally binding floor that prevents it from ever functioning as a true exit.
What's the floor?
The text states that the trade representative may modify the rate of duty if they determine a country has taken significant steps to either increase or decrease its imports. But the statute explicitly mandates that any adjusted rate must be greater than 0.
Greater than 0. That is a mathematically absolute barrier.
It is.
If a country subjected to the tariff completely and entirely ceases all imports of Russian energy, bringing their total volume to absolute 0, the trade representative can lower the punitive tariff, but they are legally barred from lowering it to 0 using that subsection.
The mechanism operates structurally like a mechanical ratchet.
A ratchet, right.
It can tighten the pressure by increasing the tariff, and it can slightly loosen the pressure by decreasing the tariff, but the statutory language prevents the ratchet from ever fully opening. The tool built for behavioral calibration legally cannot be used for release.
So if the arithmetic recalculation cannot release a state, and the rate adjustment tool is legally barred from dropping the tariff to 0, what are the actual structural exits available to a sovereign nation trapped in this regime?
There are only 2 available exits, and both are procedurally heavy, relying entirely on high-level political discretion rather than the arithmetic of trade volume.
Okay, what's the first exit?
The first exit is located in Section 115. This is a standard presidential waiver authority.
Right.
The President of the United States can waive the application of the duty, but only by submitting a formal written certification to Congress stating that the waiver is explicitly in the national interest of the U.S.
Which means a state's release is no longer tied to their energy import data. It is tied to whether the president is willing to expend the political capital necessary to issue a formal national interest waiver to the legislative branch.
Yes, it becomes entirely political. And the second exit is detailed in Section 117, which governs termination.
Okay, how does termination work?
This requires the president to formally certify that the targeted foreign government is no longer engaging in the sanctioned activity and has provided reliable, verifiable assurances of future compliance.
But that termination certification isn't unilateral, is it? It triggers a congressional review mechanism.
It does. The termination certification is subject to a 30 to 60-day congressional review period.
Wow.
And during that statutory window, Congress possesses the authority to introduce and enact a joint resolution of disapproval,
Which would functionally veto the president's termination and reinstate the tariff.
Exactly.
Consider the profound architectural asymmetry here. A sovereign state enters the tariff regime automatically, captured by a mathematical formula executed by commercial trackers, and finalized by the trade representative every 180 days.
Right. Automatic entry.
But to exit the regime, that same state requires either a presidential national interest waiver or a termination certification that must survive a congressional review period where the legislature holds a veto.
It's completely lopsided. The entry is automatic and arithmetic. The exit is discretionary, highly politicized, and procedurally arduous.
And we should probably address a common misconception regarding the lifespan of the legislation itself. Division A does contain a sunset clause in Section 203, which terminates the entire legal framework 5 years after enactment.
Yeah, but a universal sunset for the statute is entirely different from a behavioral release mechanism for an individual country.
Exactly. If a state is captured by the rolling recalculation engine in month 2 of the statute's life, they are trapped in the regime. They're reliant entirely on political waivers or vetoable terminations until the entire statute expires nearly 5 years later.
And, the Lawcratic paper notes that this specific structural gap, the absence of a delisting clause, was actually recognized contemporaneously during the drafting process in the Senate.
Okay, we must frame this carefully for the listener. This relies on press reporting of closed-door negotiations. It is not part of the official, formal legislative record.
Right, important caveat.
But what did the press reporting indicate regarding Senator Warnock?
Contemporaneous reporting indicated that Senator Warnock, who was reportedly a final holdout on agreeing to the Senate time agreement, sought explicit written clarification from the United States Trade Representative.
Clarification on what?
According to the reports, he wanted formal assurance that the tariffs would in fact be removed if a targeted country subsequently fell out of the top 5 ranking.
And after reportedly seeking that executive assurance, he withdrew his own amendment to the tariff language, allowing the bill to proceed.
Right. The paper utilizes this reporting to illustrate a critical point. The absence of an explicit delisting clause was not merely a theoretical flaw discovered after the fact by legal analysts.
It was a structural gap that was felt and debated in the room during the active negotiations.
Yeah, they knew about it.
It is an astonishing legislative choice. I mean, the proposed statute requires significantly less procedural effort to mathematically capture a sovereign state than it requires to legally release one.
It engineers a regime where modifying your behavior to completely comply with the intent of the statute provides zero guarantee of an exit from the penalty.
And this architectural asymmetry, where the map of targets recalculates and moves every 180 days, but the exit doors remain bolted shut, it really culminates in what the Lawcratic paper identifies as the central, unresolved statutory mismatch of the entire legislative text.
Which requires us to analyze the conflict between the baseline and the recalculation engine.
Right. This is where we must examine the specific text closely, because the drafters have placed 2 clauses in close proximity that govern time and eligibility in fundamentally contradictory ways.
Yes. We are looking at the interaction between subsection C1b, which we called the initial baseline rule, and subsection E1, the rolling recalculation engine.
Okay, let's lay them out.
The initial baseline rule in subsection C1b defines the class of targeted countries by explicit reference to the most recent 12-month period preceding the date of the enactment of this act.
Preceding the date of enactment, that is a permanently fixed window of time. If this proposed bill is signed into law on January 1st, the eligibility window is permanently locked as the 12 months prior to that specific January 1. That window never changes.
It's static.
It is a historical fact, phrased in amber at the exact moment of enactment.
Yes. But then the text introduces subsection E1, the recalculation engine. This clause instructs the trade representative to determine new rankings every 180 days based on the most recent 12-month period preceding the determination.
So the data map moves. The recalculation window rolls forward dynamically every 6 months.
Right.
But the definitional gate that actually authorizes the tariff in subsection C is permanently frozen at the moment of enactment.
It is.
It's akin to a camera taking a photograph of runners at a starting line to determine who is in the race. But the adjudicators are attempting to award medals based on a live video feed that commenced 10 minutes later.
That is the precise mechanical failure. The list of volumes moves, but the baseline statutory eligibility does not.
It's a total paradox.
And before we debate how to legally resolve this, we have to briefly note an additional structural omission that just highlights the erratic nature of the drafting here.
Oh, right, the evasion facilitators.
Yes. The third class of targets established by the initial baseline rule, the sovereign states facilitating sanctions evasion, is entirely omitted from the rolling recalculation engine.
Subsection explicitly orders a 180-day recalculation of the crude oil importers and the natural gas importers. It is completely silent regarding the evasion facilitators.
Meaning the evasion targets might simply be permanently frozen as whichever states were facilitating on the day the bill passed, with zero statutory mechanism to update the list as evasion networks adapt and shift geographically.
That is a massive operational oversight. But returning to the core conflict, the frozen baseline versus the rolling recalculation, the Lawcratic paper presents two distinct methods of statutory interpretation to address this mismatch. One is a narrow textual reading, and the other is a broad functional reading.
Let's explore the tension between these two interpretive frameworks.
Okay, I will adopt the perspective of the narrow textual reading.
Go for it.
Looking strictly at the words on the page, my argument is that the rolling recalculation engine in subsection E only possesses the authority to recompute rankings within the original closed universe of countries fixed by the initial baseline rule at enactment.
So it's basically just a reshuffling tool.
Exactly. It legally cannot capture or add any new sovereign state that was not already in the top 5 on day 1.
How do you defend that restriction purely from the text?
The structural cross-references are overwhelming. Look at subsection A, which is the clause that actually creates the legal authority to impose the tariffs. It restricts duties exclusively to goods imported from a country described in subsection C.
Right.
And then it literally repeats the restriction in parentheses, and only from a country described in subsection C.
The double emphasis is very notable.
Right. Furthermore, look at the executive burden in subsection G1b. It requires the executive branch to submit a methodology proving that the country subject to the duty is a country described in subsection C. Okay, I follow.
And the absolute definitive proof is the rule of construction in subsection H. It states unequivocally, "Nothing in this act shall be construed to authorize the imposition of duties with respect to goods imported from any country not expressly described in subsection C."
That's pretty ironclad textually.
The phrase expressly described legally locks the targeting system to the original frozen baseline. The 180-day recalculation is mathematically restricted to merely shuffling the ranking order of the original top 5 states.
So it can't pull in a new country at all.
It is legally barred from pulling in a country that was number 6 at enactment, even if their volume surges and they become number 1 a year later.
Okay, that is a formidable textual argument. However, adopting the broad functional reading, I must counter that subsection E must be interpreted as an independent, standalone source of tariff imposition.
How so?
Well, if we adopt your narrow textual reading, a statutory mandate requiring a complex, biannual recalculation of global energy flows that is legally barred from ever capturing a new state serves absolutely no practical legislative purpose. You mean, why would they do it?
Yeah, why would Congress mandate a resource-intensive recalculation every 180 days if the executive branch can never actually add a new offender to the list?
To continually justify the tariffs on the original 5.
To what practical end, though?
Yeah.
The duties are authorized up to 100% for all of them, regardless of their internal ranking order. Functionally, the clear legislative intent was to track and penalize shifting global trade flows dynamically over time.
I see your point.
Furthermore, the broad functional reading possesses its own textual support. Subsections B and G1 explicitly refer to duties imposed under subsection A or subsection E.
Oh, the word or.
Yes, the deliberate use of the disjunctive word or legally treats the recalculation engine in subsection E as an independent source of duty imposition in its own right, not merely an administrative housekeeping task subordinate to the initial baseline rule.
Okay, but if you successfully argue that the recalculation engine can independently pull brand new sovereign states into the tariff regime based on the rolling window, what is the legal status of those newly captured countries?
That's the catch.
Because they are captured by subsection E, they are not described in subsection C, because they were not in the top 5 during the frozen pre-enactment window.
And that exposes the severe structural cost of the broad functional reading. Any new sovereign state captured solely by the rolling mechanism of subsection E is structurally locked out of every single protection offered by the statute.
Because the exemptions are explicitly tied to the frozen baseline.
Precisely. The natural gas exemption in subsection D is explicitly textually restricted to a country described in subsection C1.
Oh, wow.
And the rate adjustment tool in subsection B, which allows the lowering of tariffs, is explicitly restricted to a country described in subsection C.
So if a new state is mathematically captured by the recalculation engine in year 2, they cannot legally access the natural gas exemption.
Right.
And the trade representative cannot legally adjust their tariff rate based on behavioral compliance.
Exactly. They are subjected to the maximum penalty with 0 statutory relief valves available.
We have arrived at an absolute interpretive deadlock here.
We really have.
The narrow textual reading respects the rigid cross-references and the explicit rule of construction, but it renders the complex 180-day recalculation mandate functionally dead letters.
And the broad functional reading gives vital purpose to the recalculation engine, but it violently strips any newly captured state of all statutory defenses and blatantly violates the explicit rule of construction.
So how does the Lawcratic paper resolve this?
The paper concludes that this is not a simple contradiction that invalidates the text. It is an unreconciled statutory mismatch that is capable of reconciliation only by construction at the point of enforcement.
Meaning the legislative branch has failed to resolve the contradiction, leaving the burden entirely on the executive branch.
Exactly. The text cannot execute itself.
The very first time the executive branch submits a written methodology to congressional committees, they will be forced to choose an interpretation.
They have to. They must formally declare in writing whether they believe the rolling window has the legal authority to capture new states or if it is permanently bound to the frozen baseline.
They basically have to finish drafting the fundamental logic of the statute before they can enforce it.
Yes. And laying this unresolved, mathematically rigid, and temporally mismatched mechanism over the actual physical reality of global energy trade produces immediate geopolitical friction.
Which brings us to the ultimate consequence of this proposed architecture. The paper visualizes this geopolitical consequence as the dangerous overlay of 3 distinct global maps.
3 maps that fundamentally do not coincide, yet the statute treats them as a single targeting matrix.
Right, so let's go through them. Map 1 is the map of Russian energy dependence.
Yes. If we examine the crude oil tracking mechanism under the proposed statutory rules, the arithmetic leads inexorably to the Asian continent.
And we must reiterate our strict constraint here for the listener. The sovereign names we're about to discuss are purely illustrative candidates based on current observable trade structures.
Absolutely. They are absolutely not statutory determinations of who is on the list because the list does not legally exist.
The caveat is understood. But examining the current commercial data, who takes the massive volumes of crude?
Commercial tracking consistently indicates that China and India take the vast majority of seaborne Russian crude oil, with Turkey following at a distance.
Okay.
If the proposed statute is operationalized to measure total volume relentlessly, the architecture effectively prices third country access to the American domestic market based entirely on their historical dependence on Russian energy.
So the unavoidable consequence is that this U.S. tariff weapon is aimed squarely at major, complex Asian economies that are actively managing their own sovereign energy requirements.
Exactly. That is Map 1, the map of dependence.
But Map 2 introduces immediate strategic friction. Map 2 is the map of American alliances. And this map is heavily implicated when we examine the natural gas provisions.
This friction is generated entirely by the customs measurement issue we analyzed earlier. The statute dictates the use of HS 2711, a customs heading that amalgamates pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas, LNG, into a single undifferentiated ranking.
Right, they just lump it all together.
Because of this aggregation, candidate states for the natural gas tariff prominently include core United States treaty allies.
Can you provide an illustrative example of this alliance friction?
Consider the Republic of France. France takes virtually zero Russian pipeline gas.
Okay.
However, independent commercial vessel tracking frequently reports French ports as a primary European destination for Russian LNG cargoes, specifically originating from the Yamal facility in the Russian Arctic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If the executive branch aggregates those massive LNG volumes under heading 2711 without deploying a conversion standard designed to protect them, a coercive tariff class originally built to punish Russian state revenue could mathematically reach a vital strategic partner like France by sheer arithmetic alone.
And crucially, because the statutory exemption threshold is measured against Russia's total global exports rather than France's domestic energy consumption, France would easily clear the numerical bar.
They'd sail right over it.
Their only statutory defense against a 100% ad valorem U.S. tariff would be convincing the United States Trade Representative that they have taken undefined, subjective, significant steps to reduce their imports.
The map of strategic alignment and the mathematical map of the statute just collide violently.
Which brings us to map 3, the map of observable trade.
Right. This map relates specifically to the evasion facilitator class. The proposed statute attempts to target a complex network of actors facilitating the illicit movement of sanctioned oil.
Okay.
But the observable physical form of this network, the dark shadow fleets, the intricate ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, the deliberately opaque maritime insurance structures, it is actively adapting to global enforcement pressure every single day.
The evasion networks are highly fluid, shifting geographic jurisdictions constantly to remain undetected.
Yeah.
Yet the proposed statute, as we analyzed in the recalculation mismatch, completely omits the evasion class from the 180-day recalculation engine.
It seeks to penalize a network that is fundamentally fluid, utilizing a targeting mechanism that is structurally frozen at the moment of enactment.
When you synthesize the friction of these three maps, the targeting of sheer dependence, the accidental capture of strategic alliances, and the rigid pursuit of shifting evasion networks, you arrive at the ultimate consequence for the listener to grasp.
Which is the critical distinction between relational exposure and behavioral exposure.
Right. This brings us back to the puzzle we opened with today. The core geopolitical consequence of this text is profound unpredictability.
Absolutely.
Because a sovereign state's entry into the top 5 ranking is based entirely on relative volume compared to other nations. A state's exposure to devastating U.S. tariffs changes relationally rather than behaviorally.
It is the geopolitical equivalent of being graded on a mathematical curve, but with catastrophic economic penalties attached.
Exactly. It is entirely possible for a sovereign country to make aggressive, economically painful domestic policy choices to drastically reduce its imports of Russian energy.
And their behavior changes in the exact direction the U.S. statute desires.
Right. But if 4 other sovereign countries reduce their own imports at a slightly faster rate, the first country's relative share of the total remaining volume mathematically increases.
They could mathematically ascend into the top 5 ranking and automatically trigger a 100% tariff, precisely at the moment they are actively and successfully reducing their imports.
Consider the absolute unpredictability this proposed architecture creates for third-party countries. A sovereign nation cannot possibly know, simply by reading the text of the statute, whether they will be listed in the next 180-day cycle.
Their placement in the targeting matrix depends entirely on the unobservable sovereign behavior of other nations.
And if they're captured by the mathematics, they have no defined behavioral path for release based on their own compliance.
They are trapped in a rigid mathematical matrix that relies entirely on subjective executive discretion to function.
It is a proposed mechanism that generates global leverage through the weaponization of uncertainty, relying on the threat of arbitrary arithmetic as much as the direct application of the penalty itself.
That's a perfect way to summarize it.
As we conclude this deep dive, we must reiterate our mandatory status check one final time.
Yes, please.
The text we have rigorously analyzed today, H.R. 5334, as amended by the United States Senate on August 7, 2026, is pending legislation.
It currently resides in the House of Representatives.
It is unequivocally not enacted law. It is a proposed architecture for global trade enforcement.
And its ultimate future depends entirely on how the legislative body attempts to reconcile the profound, unresolved operational mechanics we have traced today.
We leave you with a final thought, drawn directly from the conclusion of the Lawcratic paper. It perfectly encapsulates the structural irony we have spent this time exploring.
It really does.
Consider the inherent tension when rigid legislative text attempts to capture the fluid reality of a moving world. A statute that recalculates the world every 180 days has bound itself to a description of the world taken once. A global tariff mechanism with the power to aggressively penalize American allies was just passed by the United States Senate. But it did not begin its life as a sophisticated foreign policy tool. It actually started as a tax deduction for early childhood educators.
Yeah, which is fascinating.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. If you are a practitioner, so whether you are advising a foreign government, a multinational energy firm, or maybe you're simply mapping global trade compliance, you really need to understand the precise mechanics of the text we are examining today.
Right.
We're analyzing the Lawcratic research paper titled The Frozen Baseline, which dissects Section 113 of the Lindsey-Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act of 2026.
But before we even look at a single operational clause, we absolutely have to establish the crucial legal status of this text.
Yes, very important.
If you are building compliance models based on this language, you have to understand where it sits in the legislative architecture right now.
Right, because it's not actually law yet.
Exactly. The text we are analyzing is an amendment to H.R. 5334, which was passed by the United States Senate on the 7th of August, 2026.
Okay.
So it is currently a pending House bill. It is not an enacted statute. I cannot stress that enough. It is not law.
Meaning any subsequent action by the House of Representatives could completely alter the provisions we are about to discuss.
Precisely.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is to analyze Section 113 strictly as an operating mechanism. We are completely setting aside the political signaling that usually surrounds these international sanctions architectures.
Right. No speculation, just the text.
Exactly. We are going to dissect the structural features of the text itself. We will examine its temporal mismatch clauses, its highly specific operational requirements, and, well, the really rigid arithmetic mechanism it creates for selecting states.
And to really understand how that mechanism functions, you have to first look at the legislative vehicle that carries it.
The tax bill.
Right, because the architecture of a statute is almost always constrained by the procedural route it took through the congressional chambers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In this instance, H.R. 5334 did not begin its life as a vehicle for international sanctions, nor was it originally drafted by the Foreign Relations Committees.
It began as a highly targeted tax bill.
Exactly. Representative Panetta introduced it in the House to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986.
And its sole original purpose was just to allow early childhood educators to claim the educator expense deduction.
Right.
Which is, a specific tax benefit that was already available to standard K through 12 school teachers.
Yeah. And yet, on the 7th of August, 2026, the Senate took this educator tax bill, struck Section 1, and just inserted Division A.
Which is the Lindsey-Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act of 2026.
Right. But the original educator deduction actually survives in the text.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it survives as Division B. And the title of the bill was amended to reflect this highly unusual dual structure.
So you have a global sanctions regime and a kindergarten teacher tax break sitting in the same piece of legislation.
Exactly.
But why this specific vehicle? Why hijack a tax bill for a massive geopolitical sanctions regime?
Well, it comes down to strict constitutional mechanics.
Yeah.
Sections 112 and 113 of the Graham Act direct the imposition of duties, right? Tariffs on goods imported into the United States.
Right.
Under the origination clause of the U.S. Constitution, any measure that raises revenue must originate in the House of Representatives.
Okay. So the Senate couldn't just start this on their own.
Precisely. The text explicitly treats these new duties as revenue measures.
I see.
For instance, Section 117 of the Act routes the termination review of these duties directly to the Committee on Ways and Means in the House and the Committee on Finance in the Senate.
So it totally bypasses the foreign affairs committees that handle the rest of the title.
Exactly. Therefore, to pass a sanctions architecture that relies on broad tariff authority, the Senate could not simply draft a new bill.
They needed a House-passed revenue bill as an available vehicle.
Right. And the result is a piece of legislation containing a global tariff mechanism carried on a House bill designed for kindergarten teachers.
That is wild. But if you are analyzing congressional intent, you might look at that really unusual procedural route and wonder, if this mechanism was passed quietly.
Right, like a rider.
Yeah. Was this treated as a routine rider? just slip through without active scrutiny of the specific highly aggressive tariff authority it contained? I mean, does the Senate floor record actually reflect active consideration of this specific mechanism?
It does. It absolutely does.
Really?
Yeah. The Senate floor record demonstrates unambiguously that the chamber actively considered the mechanics of the tariff authority. It was not a quiet writer.
Okay, so how do we know that?
Well, two specific amendments define the shape of what the Senate ultimately passed. And this proves the chamber knew exactly what powers it was delegating.
What was the first one?
First, Senator Paul, joined by 8 colleagues, moved to strike the third country duty provision outright.
Oh, wow. So a direct challenge.
Yes, it was a direct challenge to the tariff mechanism, and it failed by a recorded vote of 32 to 64.
Okay, so they explicitly voted to keep the tariff authority in.
Right.
And what was the Second Amendment? Because that feels equally critical for establishing the legislative intent of the text we are analyzing today.
It is. Senator Cantwell submitted an amendment specifically designed to time limit this sweeping tariff authority.
Okay, how would that have worked?
Her proposal would have required formal notification to Congress within 48 hours of any duty being imposed or increased.
Okay, that seems standard.
Furthermore, it required an executive assessment of the economic effect on American businesses and consumers.
Right.
But most importantly, it stipulated the automatic expiry of the duty after 60 days unless Congress enacted a joint resolution of approval.
So a very strict sunset clause.
Exactly.
What happened to that amendment?
That amendment was ordered to lie on the table.
So it was ignored.
Completely. It was never called up for a vote. The floor record for that day lists only 2 amendments agreed to.
Which were?
The Graham substitute and the change of title. Final passage of the bill was agreed to by a vote of 86 to 11.
Okay, so what this procedural history tells you, as a practitioner reading the statute, is that the Senate was offered a direct proposal to remove the tariff authority entirely, and they rejected it by a 2-to-1 margin.
Right.
Furthermore, the chamber was offered a proposal to subject that authority to a strict 60-day sunset, requiring affirmative congressional approval.
And they affirmatively chose to ignore it.
Wow. So the text that passed is a deliberate structural choice, and it was clearly written to be read as a formula.
Exactly.
So we must move directly from how the text passed the Senate to the actual arithmetic mechanism it creates for selecting foreign states.
Right. Let's look at the map Congress drew.
The core of this targeting mechanism is found in subsection C. This subsection establishes the baseline criteria for entry into the tariff category. It creates 3 distinct routes into the penalty box. First, a country qualifies if it knowingly made new purchases of Russian-origin crude oil on or after the 30th day following enactment.
Okay.
And was among the 5 largest importers of such crude oil by total volume during the most recent 12-month period preceding enactment.
Right. So that's the first route.
Exactly. Second, the exact same criteria apply to natural gas.
And the third route captures any country that was among the top 5 states facilitating Russian oil sanctions evasion during that same 12-month pre-enactment period.
Okay, so top 5 for crude, top 5 for gas, and top 5 for evasion facilitation.
Exactly. The entire mechanism relies on a rigid quantitative criterion. However, membership in this penalized class is not entirely self-executing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, subparagraph C1A requires an affirmative executive finding that the country knowingly made new purchases after the stated date.
Right, the executive has to actually make that determination.
Furthermore, subsection G1B requires the executive branch to detail the methodology by which it reached the ranking.
So they have to explain their math.
Yes, but once that method is settled by the executive, the ordering of states is simply a matter of arithmetic.
Right, but the statute does not just take a single snapshot, does it? It creates a rolling mechanism.
It does.
And that brings us to subsection E, which governs the recalculation of the list. The text mandates that not later than 180 days after the initial imposition of duties and every 180 days thereafter, the trade representative, consulting the Secretaries of State and Energy, must make a new determination.
Right.
They must determine the countries that are the 5 largest importers based on the most recent 12-month period preceding the determination.
Now, if you are advising compliance officers, you must read that specific clause very carefully.
Why is that?
Because it mandates 2 separate rankings, not 1.
Oh, really? Because when describing this legislation, public observers often compress the target into a single list of, the 5 largest buyers.
Exactly. But the statutory text does not say that at the point where it performs its recurring operation.
Okay, break that down for me.
Subparagraph C1b does speak of the 5 largest importers of crude oil or natural gas in a single formulation for the initial baseline.
Right.
However, paragraph E1 explicitly splits the recalculation task into 2 distinct determinations of 5.
So it creates a crude oil list of 5 and a natural gas list of 5.
Exactly. These lists may overlap or they may not. Functionally, this means the section reaches up to 10 states, not 5.
Right, up to 10 sovereign states simply based on trade volume arithmetic.
Exactly.
When analyzing a statute that casts such a wide mechanical net, your immediate question has to be about statutory relief.
Always.
Does the text provide off-ramps? If a state is caught in this arithmetic, is there a way out?
Well, the text contains only one exception, located in subsection D, and it is remarkably narrow in 3 distinct ways.
Okay, let's go through it. What was the first one?
First, it applies exclusively to natural gas.
Correct.
A country captured in the crude oil ranking has absolutely no equivalent statutory relief.
Wow. Okay, so if you were a crude buyer, you were just stuck.
Exactly. Second, the quantitative threshold for the exception requires that the country's total Russian origin gas imports during the relevant window were less than 15% of Russia's total annual gas exports.
Wait, we need to pause and examine that specific wording because the denominator there is crucial.
It is.
The statute measures the importing state's volume against Russia's total global export volume rather than against the importing state's own domestic consumption.
Yes. And because Russia's global export volume is historically so vast, 15% of that total constitutes a massive quantity of natural gas.
Right. So the practical effect of drafting the formula this way is that the quantitative threshold is set at a level that almost all individual sovereign states will clear without any effort.
Very true. Very few single countries consume more than 15% of Russia's entire global export capacity.
Okay, so everyone clears the math. What's the third limitation?
Well, because that quantitative limb is so easily satisfied, the entirety of the legal burden shifts to the second limb of the exception. That second limb requires the importing state to have taken significant steps to reduce its imports.
Ah, and that is purely qualitative.
Yes. It is a purely qualitative requirement, and the phrase, significant steps to reduce, is entirely undefined anywhere in the statute.
So by leaving the term undefined, the text draws a highly subjective, country-level qualitative judgment into a statutory structure that otherwise relies on a rigid quantitative ranking rule.
Exactly. It provides no metric, no percentage drop, and no timeline for determining what constitutes a significant step.
Which brings us to the core operational problem of the text.
Right, the measurement.
Yes, the measurement. We have an arithmetic formula that ranks states by total volume, but how do you actually measure that volume?
That is the million-dollar question.
The central operational command of Section 113 is to rank states across specified customs headings. Subsection G2 dictates that for the purpose of determining whether a country is an importer, crude oil is defined as the substance described in Harmonized System Code 2709. And natural gas is the substance described in Code 2711.
Yes.
Furthermore, subsection I3 defines natural gas to mean natural gas, whether unmixed or in any mixture of natural and artificial gas, including liquefied natural gas.
And this is where the structural problem arises.
Because the headings are different.
Exactly. Those 2 harmonized system headings are fundamentally different in scope.
How so?
Heading 2709 covers crude petroleum oils and very little else. It is a straightforward, homogeneous category.
Okay, so crude is crude.
Right. Heading 2711, however, covers petroleum gases and other gaseous hydrocarbons. Natural gas is just one member of this broad category.
What else is in there?
The heading also carries propane, butanes, ethane, ethylene, propylene, butylene, and butadiene.
Wow. Okay, so a lot of different things.
Yeah. Only 2 of its specific subheadings actually cover natural gas, one for the liquefied state and one for the gaseous pipeline state.
So by defining natural gas through the broad heading 2711, Section 113 adopts a customs category that is materially broader than the commodity it actually names in the text.
Exactly. And this divergence in scope leads directly to a massive operational problem.
Which is the divergence in units of measurement.
Right. It is like asking a trade auditor to sum a single corporate ledger where one division reports physical assets in cubic meters, another in barrels, and a third in kilograms.
But the statute expressly refuses to authorize an administrative exchange rate.
Exactly. Within the American Customs Schedule, the 2 natural gas subheadings are reported in thousands of cubic meters.
Okay.
propane, butanes, and ethane are reported in barrels.
Oh.
And the olefins are reported in kilograms.
So you have several completely incompatible units of measurement sitting inside the single customs heading that this statute mandates for ranking.
Yes. Ranking states by total volume across heading 2709 for crude oil is simple arithmetic.
Because it's all one unit.
Exactly. But ranking states across heading 2711 requires a prior administrative decision about what substances are being aggregated and into which common unit of measurement.
And Section 113 makes neither of these decisions.
It does not. It simply commands the executive to rank by total volume.
Okay, but you might push back here and say, doesn't the United States already possess an administrative architecture for converting these liquid and gaseous volumes into a standardized metric for statistical reporting?
And you would be right. It does.
Okay, so why is that an issue?
Because of jurisdictional reach. A statistical note to Chapter 27 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule directs that for statistical reporting number 211.11.0000, the volume of liquid natural gas shall be reported on a gaseous equivalent volume basis.
Right, which is why liquefied and pipeline gas can appear in the same unit on the same page of American import data.
Exactly. The architecture exists. But the fatal limitation of that existing architecture is its jurisdictional reach.
Oh, because the conversion rule governs goods entering the United States.
Precisely. It triggers when an importer files entry documentation with U.S. Customs.
And Section 113 concerns imports by third countries from the Russian Federation.
Right. These are foreign-to-foreign flows. They are cargoes moving from Russian terminals to ports in Asia or Europe that never touch an American port.
And therefore they generate no American entry summary.
Exactly. So while the United States possesses a technical conversion architecture for its own imports, Section 113 does not expressly incorporate that architecture into the foreign country ranking it commands the executive to create.
So to understand how this gap is filled in practice when tracking foreign-to-foreign flows, we can look to public data trackers, right?
We have to. The statutory universe is global.
Because the two largest importers of Russian crude oil by any metric are China and India.
Right. Neither is covered by the highly detailed European statistical system, and one has actively curtailed the disclosure of sensitive import details.
So the leading public tracker of Russian fossil fuel exports must make a series of explicit, highly technical methodological assumptions to produce country-level volumes at all.
Yes. If you review their published methodology, pipeline flows into Turkey are converted using a fixed natural gas density of 0.717 kilograms per cubic meter.
Okay.
To attribute Russian gas to states that have no direct pipeline connection to Russia, the tracker assumes that each country behaves as a perfect gas mixer on any given day.
A perfect gas mixer.
Right. And where foreign customs data lags, flows are assumed to remain constant since the last observation. And missing recent months are projected based on historical seasonal changes.
Wow.
Furthermore, pipeline oil to China is derived residually by subtracting known seaborne shipments from the total volume reported by Chinese customs.
Okay, let's be clear, though. These assumptions are not defects in the tracking data.
No, not at all. The tracker discloses all of them transparently.
Right. Rather, these assumptions illustrate the exact shape of the statutory problem. Every dataset must operationalize a definition.
Exactly. A density constant, an attribution model, a projection rule, and a proprietary shipment dataset stand between the physical reality of global trade and any single figure that could be definitively called the 5 largest importers.
So the legal question raised by Section 113 is not which public dataset is technically superior. The legal question is which operational definition the statute actually authorizes.
And the statute assigns the consequences of those choices directly to the executive branch.
How so?
Well, subsection G1 requires that not later than 10 days before imposing a duty, the president or the trade representative must submit a written justification to the appropriate congressional committees.
Okay.
This justification must provide a substantive rationale for the rate and must detail the methodology used to determine that the country subject to the duty is indeed a country described in the baseline criteria of subsection C.
Okay, this is a critical point for practitioners. If the statute had fixed the methodology itself, like if it had specified the density constants and the conversion metrics, the executive would have no methodology left to disclose.
Precisely. The statute leaves quantification completely open, making it an executive choice rather than a legislative command.
Right. The ranking can be estimated from public data, but it cannot be independently reproduced from a single public methodology matched to the statute because the statute provides none.
Exactly. So we must shift now from how states are selected and measured to the mechanics of how they are released from the tariff regime.
Or rather, the profound lack of such mechanics.
Right. The structural gap in Section 113 is a severe asymmetry in its temporal cycle.
As we discussed, subsection E mandates that the membership of the top 5 importers is recalculated every 180 days based on a rolling 12-month window.
Yeah.
However, absolutely nothing in Section 113 provides that a duty ends when a country ceases to be among the 5 largest.
It is a massive oversight.
Right, so we have built this massive, complex, mathematically rigorous trap to get countries onto this tariff list. But what happens when a country actually does what the policy intends?
What do you mean?
Well, what happens if they entirely stop buying Russian gas and mathematically fall out of the top 5? How do they get off the list?
They do not.
Wait, really?
The section contains no delisting clause. There is no instruction directing the trade representative to withdraw a duty imposed under a prior determination simply because a later 180-day determination has superseded it.
That seems like a huge structural flaw.
It is. Division A as a whole does contain a sunset provision. Section 203 terminates the division 5 years after enactment, with one exception for an Iran-related extension.
Okay.
But what the section critically lacks is a country-level rule that automatically releases a specific state when the rolling arithmetic no longer places it within the top 5.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second.
Hmm.
What about the rate adjustment tool?
What about it?
Well, the statute gives the executive branch the power to modify tariffs. Cannot the trade representative simply adjust a compliant state's tariff rate down to 0 if their import volume drops out of the top 5?
The text explicitly forbids this.
Oh, wow.
Subsection B governs rate modifications. It states that after the initial imposition, the trade representative shall modify or adjust any rate of duty imposed to a rate greater than 0 and up to 100% ad valorem.
Greater than 0.
Yes. This adjustment is permitted upon a written determination that the country has taken significant steps regarding its imports. But the phrase greater than 0 operates as a hard statutory floor.
So the rate literally cannot legally be reduced to 0.
Exactly.
Furthermore, consider the triggers for this rate adjustment. A modification is triggered if a country has taken significant steps either to increase or to decrease or cease its importation.
Right.
So 2 completely opposite behaviors triggered the exact same rate adjustment instrument.
Yes. A state that massively increases its purchases of Russian energy and a state that ceases them entirely both legally satisfy the condition for a modification.
But the text does not specify which direction of tariff adjustment follows from which finding.
No, it specifies the factual triggers for recalibration, but not the sign of the recalibration. What is unambiguous is the floor.
The tool built for calibration cannot legally be used for release.
Exactly. And this structural asymmetry was actually noticed during the drafting process.
Really? By who?
Press reporting on the final days of negotiation records an episode involving Senator Warnock.
Okay.
Now, it is important to emphasize that this is press reporting from closed negotiations, not an official legislative record, but it is highly illustrative of the statutory mechanics. According to the reports, Senator Warnock sought written clarification from the United States Trade Representative that tariffs would be removed if a country fell out of the top 5 purchasers.
And following this request,
He reportedly withdrew his own amendment to the tariff language.
the administrative law implications of that episode are staggering.
They really are.
I mean, the clarification he reportedly sought addresses the exact provision the statutory text does not contain. A gap that a lawmaker attempts to close via an executive letter, seeking assurance from an agency rather than amending the binding statutory text.
Right.
That is a gap that was clearly felt in the room during negotiations. It is not merely a theoretical problem constructed by analysts after the fact.
The drafters knew the exit was missing.
Right.
And without an arithmetic delisting rule and with a rate adjustment floor locked at greater than 0, states are left with only 2 possible exits from the tariff regime.
And both are procedurally heavy, demanding immense diplomatic capital.
Yes. Section 115 provides a national interest waiver. The president may waive the duty upon submitting a written certification to Congress that the waiver is in the national interest, accompanied by a detailed report.
Okay, so a presidential waiver.
Alternatively, Section 117 permits the termination of the duty based on a certification that the foreign government is no longer engaging in the activity and has provided reliable assurances of future compliance.
And determination under Section 117 is subject to a strict congressional review period of 30 days, or 60 days, depending on the legislative calendar.
Right.
During this period, Congress may introduce a joint resolution of disapproval to block the termination.
So consider the asymmetry here. Entry into the tariff regime is driven by a periodic arithmetic computation performed unilaterally by the executive every 180 days.
But the exit from the regime is not arithmetic.
No, it requires a formal certification, a detailed report, and is subject to congressional review and potential override.
So the procedure for exit is vastly heavier than the procedure for entry. Membership is recalculated every 180 days, but delisting is not.
And this brings us to the core structural problem of the statute.
The frozen baseline.
Exactly. The lack of an automatic exit is merely a symptom of a much deeper temporal mismatch.
There is a profound collision between the baseline eligibility clause and the rolling recalculation clause.
Yes, and this mismatch is glaringly visible when reading two adjacent provisions.
Okay, lay them out for me.
Subsection C1b fixes the baseline eligibility by defining the class based on the most recent 12-month period preceding the date of the enactment of this act.
Right, so pre-enactment.
In stark contrast, subsection E1 instructs the trade representative to determine the periodic rankings based on the most recent 12-month period preceding the determination.
Wow, okay. So one window is forever fixed at a date that never changes the exact date of enactment. And the other window advances by 180 days with every single cycle.
Yes, and this temporal divergence appears a second time along a different axis within the same text.
Right.
Subsection E refreshes two of the three classes established in subsection C, the crude oil importers and the natural gas importers.
Okay.
It is entirely silent regarding the third class. The states facilitating sanctions evasion defined in C2.
Oh. So the statute does not distribute its own temporal rule evenly across the classes it creates?
Exactly, and everything downstream in the statute is strictly keyed to the fixed baseline of subsection C.
How so?
Well, subsection A authorizes duties only on goods from a country described in C.
Okay.
Subsection B permits rate adjustments only for a country described in C.
Right.
Subsection D offers its natural gas exception only to a country described in C1, and it measures the 15% threshold over the fixed pre-enactment window described in C1b. Subsection G1b requires the executive methodology to prove that the country subject to the duty is a country described in C.
And finally, subsection H expressly forbids duties on any country not expressly described in C.
Right. So this creates a profound statutory dilemma. Two readings follow from this mismatch, and they cannot both be legally correct.
Right. The Lawcratic paper lays out the two arguments, and we need to debate them here because how a practitioner interprets this will completely dictate their compliance strategy.
Okay, let's do it.
I will argue the narrow textual reading. The text overwhelmingly supports the position that subsection E only recomputes rankings within the original class fixed at enactment by subsection C.
Okay, what is your evidence for that?
Look at the actual text of subsection H. It is a rule of construction that overrides the waiver power. It states, "Nothing in this act shall be construed to authorize the imposition of duties with respect to goods imported from any country not expressly described in subsection C."
But if you adopt that reading...
Wait, let me finish the textual argument.
Go ahead.
The word expressly in subsection H is absolute. It forecloses any attempt to read a newly admitted country into the class by implication.
Right, but...
Furthermore, if you adopt the broad functional reading and allow the 180-day recalculation in subsection E to admit new states, the cost to those newly admitted states is severe.
It is.
A state brought in solely by subsection E is, by definition, not a country described in subsection C because they weren't in the top 5 at enactment.
Correct.
Therefore, they have absolutely no access to the gas exception in subsection D because that exception is legally locked to C1 states.
Right.
And they have no access to rate adjustments under subsection B because that is also locked to C states. If subsection E admits new states, it provides entry without doors. It traps them with absolutely no statutory relief.
I acknowledge that severe cost. The broad reading forces a newly ranked state into a regime where the statutory relief valves are legally closed to it.
Exactly.
However, I must argue the broad functional reading. This focuses on the operational logic of subsection E and the administrative presumption against surplusage.
Okay, lay out the functional argument.
If subsection E merely recomputes rankings within the closed universe of the original top 5 states fixed at enactment, it has absolutely no function.
Why not?
A rolling 180-day recalculation that is forbidden from adding new states has very little utility. Why would Congress command the executive to build a complex global tracking apparatus every 6 months just to shuffle the order of the same 5 states?
Because Congress wrote a poorly drafted statute. The textual priority is clear. Subsections A, G1B, and H all strictly condition the duty on being described in subsection C.
I hear you.
Subsection E nowhere contains a clause stating that a later determination amends or enlarges the class defined in C.
But look at subsections B and G1. Both provisions refer to a duty imposed under subsection A or E.
Okay.
This phrasing explicitly treats subsection E as an independent source of duties in its own right, not merely a housekeeping update for subsection A.
I see your point.
Therefore, the mandatory instruction in E2 that the trade representative shall impose duties based on the new determinations must mean that subsection E admits new states into the tariff regime.
So it's about the administrative burden.
Administrative law abhors a reading that renders a massive, explicitly mandated executive process legally inert. The drafters intended to track the shifting flows of Russian energy over time, not freeze them in 2026.
Yet the drafters knew exactly how to address the interaction of different sections. They did so expressly in Section 115b4 regarding waivers and rate adjustments.
True.
They provided no such bridge between the rolling list in subsection E and the baseline in subsection C.
We must leave this debate unresolved, exactly as the source material does.
Yeah, it's an unreconciled mismatch, capable of reconciliation by construction. It is not a fatal contradiction.
No, the text simply does not perform the reconciliation itself. What this means in practice for anyone advising a firm or a government is that the executive branch will make the first formal construction.
Because the executive cannot impose a duty under subsection E without filing the written methodology demanded by G1B.
Exactly. That written filing to congressional committees will have to definitively assert which reading the administration is operating on.
The construction will be reviewable later by the courts, but it will be made first by the executive.
Right. So we must now connect the strict text of the statute to the strategic implications of applying this mechanism to global trade.
Okay.
When you overlay this rigid arithmetic mechanism onto the actual physical structure of Russian energy flows, it produces 3 distinct consequences.
And these consequences stem from the fact that the statute lays 3 different geographic maps over one another, and those maps do not coincide.
Exactly. Let's look at the first map.
The geography of Russian energy dependence.
Right. Let us examine the crude oil track, which is heavily concentrated in Asia. Now, I must instruct the listener that the country names used here are purely illustrative of trade structure. They are not determinations of statutory membership.
Caveat.
Commercial tracking data indicates that China and India take the overwhelming majority of Russian seaborne crude oil. What matters strategically is what this ordering represents. These are the channels through which Russian crude was rapidly redirected following Western measures in 2022. Section 113 does not price Russian exports directly. Rather, it prices third country access to the American market based on continued Russian energy dependence.
Ah, so it moves the economic cost from the producer to the purchaser.
Exactly. And for the states at the center of this redirection, the statute offers no quantitative relief.
Because the exception in subsection applies only to natural gas.
Exactly. Now, the second map is the geography of American alliances, and this collides directly with the natural gas track.
Right. As we established earlier, Harmonized System Code 2711 lumps pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas cargoes together.
Yes.
And the statute mandates a single, aggregated ranking for natural gas by total volume.
Right. This arithmetic reality places pipeline-dependent states beside states that receive seaborne cargoes.
So illustratively, pipeline states like Hungary or Slovakia would sit in the exact same mathematical ranking process as cargo states like France?
Precisely. A tariff architecture designed to apply coercive pressure on strategic competitors can, through rigid arithmetic alone, capture strategic partners.
And if a strategic partner is captured by the math, their reliance on the subsectioned exception is legally perilous.
Very much so.
Because the 15% threshold is measured against Russia's massive total global exports, an individual European state will easily clear the quantitative hurdle.
Right. Their exemption will turn entirely on the undefined qualitative requirement to have taken significant steps to reduce.
And the European Union has legislated a phased prohibition on Russian gas, yet the imports of several individual member states reached record monthly levels while that phase-out was pending.
Which creates a huge legal ambiguity. The statute does not answer whether a collective legal commitment by a bloc or an individual purchasing record by a state satisfies the undefined requirement of significant steps.
Which brings us to the third map.
The geography of observable trade.
Right. This relates to the third class of states, the evasion facilitators.
Yes. The text attempts to price a geopolitical network that has already been adapting to sanctions pressure for 3 years.
Because the shadow fleet activity and financial support networks referenced in subsection I2 are not static.
No, they are constantly shifting. The mechanism relies on tracking a network whose observable form constantly shifts through ship-to-ship transfers, reflagged tonnage, and complex intermediaries in non-sanctioning jurisdictions.
Finally, we must analyze the ultimate consequence of this structure, the problem of relational exposure.
This is critical.
The core predictability problem for any practitioner advising a foreign government is that exposure under this statute changes relationally rather than behaviorally.
Right.
Let me make sure I'm understanding the sheer mechanics of this arithmetic.
Yeah.
A country, let's call them country A, does not buy a single drop more of Russian oil. Their behavior is completely static.
Right.
But because country B and country C aggressively cut their imports to comply with Western sanctions, country A accidentally slides up the mathematical ranking into the top 5, and they get hit with a U.S. tariff, simply because the denominator of global trade shifted around them.
Exactly. Because the mechanism uses a rolling top 5 ranking, a candidate state's position is dictated entirely by the actions of other states.
Wow.
A country could enter the tariff perimeter simply because other nations reduced their Russian imports at a faster rate, thereby pushing the candidate state up the ranking into the top 5.
So the candidate state becomes subject to a severe economic penalty without having changed its own purchasing conduct at all.
Precisely. And that is the reality of the math.
Well, we will close our analysis of the operating mechanism there.
Oh.
I will restate firmly that H.R. 53334, containing the Graham Act amendment we have discussed, has not passed the House of Representatives.
Right.
It is a drafted, pending mechanism. It is not an enacted law.
Correct.
We leave you with the final thought from the Lawcratic paper, verbatim.
A statute that recalculates the world every 180 days has bound itself to a description of the world taken once.